Alica Romen moved briskly through the cabin of Flight 782, her polished shoes clicking softly against the aisle carpet. It was the third flight of the day, but she carried herself with the same precision and warmth she always did. The aircraft, a gleaming long-haul jet, was filled with nearly 300 passengers, ranging from families with excited children to business travelers buried in laptops and documents. Alica's eyes scanned the cabin as she checked seat belts, adjusted blankets, and offered smiles and kind words. She prided herself on noticing the little things like the elderly man clutching a small leather journal or the young woman nervously tapping her fingers against the armrest. The cabin crew moved like a well-oiled machine. Drinks were being offered, overhead compartments were secured, and safety demonstrations had been conducted with practiced elegance. The pilots' voices came through the intercom, calm and steady. Flight 782 is ready for takeoff. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and your tray tables are stowed. We anticipate a smooth journey to Chicago. Their confidence seemed to reassure everyone on board. Outside, the sky was a serene shade of blue, dotted with wisps of white clouds that glowed in the morning sun. Alica found a brief moment to glance through her window. The city below was shrinking rapidly as the plane climbed, cars on the highways looking like tiny specks, buildings reduced to miniatures. It was a view that always filled her with wonder and reminded her why she loved flying despite the exhausting hours. Families chatted quietly. Children clutched their favorite toys or books, and parents tried to keep spirits high with stories or soft music on headphones. A woman seated near the emergency exit whispered soothing words to a crying toddler, while a young man nervously adjusted his tie and muttered to himself about an upcoming meeting. The atmosphere, Alica thought, was one of ordinary anticipation, the kind that always preceded long flights. Yet a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered that something unusual was lurking just beyond the horizon. She quickly brushed it off, attributing the unease to fatigue. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Alica prepared the beverage cart. The soft hum of the engines was hypnotic, a steady reminder that they were high above the world, untouchable, or so it seemed. Passengers sipped coffee or tea, some closed their eyes and drifted into light sleep, while others stared out the windows in silent contemplation. Alica moved carefully down the aisle, offering drinks, sharing brief conversations, and laughing softly with those who engaged her. She prided herself on connecting, even if only for a moment, with the people she served. By now, the plane had settled into its rhythm. The gentle sway of the aircraft, the faint clatter of dishes, and the soft murmur of voices created a cocoon of normalcy. Alica paused for a second near the center of the cabin, letting her eyes travel over the passengers. The elderly man with the leather journal was scribbling notes as if recording something precious. A teenage girl was absorbed in a sketchbook, shading lines carefully, oblivious to the world around her. A business traveler was typing rapidly on a laptop, unaware of the beauty outside the window. It was then, amidst the routine and the calm, that Alica noticed something unusual. A faint vibration ran through the aisle floor, almost imperceptible at first. She paused and tapped the side of the beverage cart lightly, shaking off a twinge of concern. Perhaps it was nothing, just the engine adjusting its hum at high altitude. She continued down the aisle, smiling at passengers, offering a cup of water to a young mother and her infant, yet the subtle feeling lingered. There was a stillness in the air that didn't belong, a heaviness she couldn't explain. It wasn't fear, at least, not yet, but an odd premonition, like the quiet before a storm. She glanced at the cockpit, where the pilots were focused, their faces calm, almost eerily so. She gave them a polite nod, and they returned it, their expressions reassuring. But in that split second, Alica caught something in the co-pilot's eyes, a flicker, barely noticeable, attention hidden beneath the surface. Shaking her head, she dismissed it as overthinking. Flight 782 was just another routine journey, and she was trained to handle anything that might come her way. The calm returned, or at least she convinced herself it had. Passengers chatted, laughed, and adjusted their seats. Drinks were distributed, blankets offered, and the soft glow of overhead lights created a sense of warmth and security. Alica moved back to the center of the cabin, leaning slightly against a seat to rest her shoulders. She allowed herself a quiet breath, savoring the ordinary beauty of this ordinary moment. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly, golden in the morning sun, and inside, the cabin seemed a small, safe world above the earth. For a few fleeting minutes, everything was perfect. Unbeknownst to Alica, the illusion of safety was fragile, a thin veil over something far more dangerous. The calm before the storm was here, and the lives of 300 passengers were about to depend on courage, quick thinking, and a stranger who would appear just when hope seemed impossible. The hum of Flight 782 had barely settled into a steady rhythm when the first warning appeared. Alica Romen, moving down the aisle with her beverage cart, felt the plane shudder slightly. She paused, steadying the cart and glancing toward the cockpit. The pilots were focused on their instruments, their hands moving in precise, practiced motions. Passengers, for the most part, were oblivious, chatting quietly or gazing out at the endless expanse of clouds. But then the aircraft jolted sharply, sending cups clattering and blankets tumbling to the floor. A soft gasp ran through the cabin, followed by murmurs of confusion. Alica's heart quickened. She reached forward to reassure a young boy clutching his stuffed bear. "It's okay," she said, her voice calm though her pulse raced. "Just a little turbulence. Nothing to worry about." The intercom crackled, and the captain's voice, usually steady and confident, now sounded strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a technical malfunction. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." The pause between words was heavy, filled with tension that none of the passengers could see but all could feel. Alica moved quickly down the aisle, offering words of comfort where she could. She saw a mother gripping her daughter's hand, white-knuckled and terrified. She offered a reassuring smile, but even she could not hide the concern creeping into her own mind. She glanced toward the cockpit again, expecting the pilots to be assessing the problem. But what she saw made her blood run cold. The co-pilot slumped forward onto the control panel. The captain appeared disoriented, one hand clutching the yoke, while the other pressed frantically on buttons she didn't recognize. Alica's breath caught in her throat. Both pilots were struggling, their usual composure shattered. Panic threatened to take hold, but she pushed it down, forcing herself to think clearly. Stay calm, she whispered to herself. She knew that in moments like these, panic could spread faster than fear itself. She moved to the cockpit door, hesitating just a moment before knocking sharply. "Sir, ma'am, are you okay in there?" There was no response. The door, locked by the pilots, offered no comfort. The metallic hum of the engines now felt unnerving, almost menacing, as though the plane itself sensed the crisis unfolding. Back in the cabin, passengers had started to notice. Screams and cries pierced the air as the aircraft lurched again, violently this time. Overhead compartments rattled, and a few items fell to the floor, bouncing and rolling dangerously close to passengers. Alica held her hand over her mouth to keep from shouting, her mind racing for a solution. She knew she had to maintain calm, at least for the passengers' sake. Suddenly, a figure rose from near the rear of the plane. A man, tall and composed, stood quietly amid the chaos. He did not flinch, did not panic, and his presence seemed to draw a subtle calm over the nearby passengers. Alica's eyes met his, and she noticed something remarkable. Despite the terror around him, he radiated confidence, authority, and a sense of purpose. I can help, he said quietly, yet with unmistakable conviction. Alica took a step back, startled. Are you a pilot? She asked, her voice barely audible over the panic of the cabin. The man shook his head. Not exactly. But I know this aircraft. Trust me. I can get us down safely. Her mind raced. Could she trust a stranger? The plane was failing. The pilots were incapacitated, and every second counted. She weighed her options: do nothing and risk disaster, or follow a stranger's instructions with her life and the lives of 300 passengers in his hands. Something in his eyes, the calm certainty of his stance, told her to trust him. All right, she said, her voice steadying despite the fear gnawing at her. Follow me. We need to get to the cockpit. Together, they pushed through the panicked passengers. Alica tried to keep her composure, repeating instructions. Remain seated. Keep calm. Fasten your seatbelts. She grabbed the intercom and called for silence, her voice firm and commanding. Slowly, some order returned as the passengers began to obey. When they reached the cockpit, the man wasted no time. Alica opened the door and he slipped inside, his hands moving confidently over the instruments. He checked switches, rebooted systems, and assessed the failing autopilot with rapid precision. The engines had begun to falter, and warning lights flashed red across the panels. Yet, even under immense pressure, he remained composed. Alica leaned against the cockpit frame, her pulse racing, and watched as the unknown man worked. He adjusted levers, recalibrated instruments, and spoke softly to himself as though reciting a precise formula. Outside, the plane continued to dip and sway, but slowly, imperceptibly at first, the violent jolts began to subside. The aircraft, leveled, stabilized by the hands of someone who had appeared like a phantom, calm amid a storm of panic and fear. Alica exhaled, a small measure of hope creeping into her chest. The crisis was far from over, but for the first time in terrifying minutes, she sensed that the nightmare might have a solution. The unknown man had taken command, and the fate of 300 lives now rested in the hands of a stranger whose identity remained a mystery. The cockpit of Flight 782 had become a battleground of flashing lights, shrill alarms, and chaos. Alica Romen stood just behind the threshold, gripping the doorframe as her eyes darted between the unconscious co-pilot and the sweating, disoriented captain who could barely lift his head. But the man who had stepped forward, the stranger with the steady gaze and calm demeanor, had taken the pilot's seat without hesitation. His hands moved over the controls swiftly, almost instinctively. He grasped the trembling yoke, his fingers adjusting its angle with a confidence that sent a shiver of relief through Alica. It was as though he had been here 1,000 times before, though he had admitted he wasn't a pilot. Still, every movement he made was precise, controlled, and shockingly familiar. Engines fluctuating, navigation failure. Autopilot offline, he murmured under his breath, scanning the instruments. His voice was low but firm, threading through the panic like a lifeline. Alica watched him, torn between awe and fear. What do you need? Tell me anything, I'll do it, she said, stepping forward. First, he replied without looking up, we need the captain out of the seat. He's not coherent, and he's making the controls unpredictable. Alica nodded, quickly helping. The captain leaned back into the co-pilot's chair. The man unbuckled him gently and secured him safely out of the way. While she adjusted the captain's oxygen mask, she felt the plane shudder again, less violently than before, but enough to remind her how fragile the situation was. Asterisk, the stranger leaned toward the dashboard, flicking switches in a pattern she didn't understand. Warning lights still blinked fiercely, each one signaling danger. The shrill tone of altitude alerts echoed through the cockpit. Asterisk, what happened to them? Alica whispered, glancing toward the pilots. Asterisk, most likely a gas leak, he answered immediately. Not enough to knock everyone out, but enough to incapacitate anyone exposed too long. Pilots inhale more because of the ventilation intake near the controls. He paused, steadying the yoke as the aircraft dipped slightly. We're lucky it didn't spread further. Asterisk lucky. The word felt wrong. Yet, as she looked at the unconscious pilots and then at the stranger working tirelessly, she realized he was right. Luck had played a small part. But something else had stepped forward, too. Someone else. Asterisk. Okay, he continued. I need your help monitoring altitude and speed. Read out anything that changes. Asterisk. Alica positioned herself beside him, scanning the displays as he requested. The numbers flickered rapidly, rising and falling like a heartbeat gone wild. Altitude dropping, she said. Speed unstable. Asterisk. I see it. His hands tightened around the yoke. He exhaled slowly, almost meditatively, then guided the plane gently upward, fighting the pull of gravity. The engines are struggling. One's losing pressure. If it fails completely, we'll have only seconds to stabilize. Asterisk. Alica felt her stomach drop. Outside the cockpit window, the vast blue horizon stretched endlessly. But the sight no longer brought wonder, it brought dread. They were suspended above the world in a damaged machine, relying entirely on a stranger whose name she didn't even know. Asterisk. Who are you? She finally asked. Asterisk. For a moment, he didn't answer. His eyes remained forward, scanning the sky, the controls, the trembling wings. Then quietly, without emotion, he said, Someone who can't let these people die. Asterisk. He didn't smile, didn't offer dramatics. Just the truth. Asterisk. The cabin behind them erupted in renewed panic as turbulence rocked the aircraft. Alica could hear passengers screaming, children crying, the frantic shuffle of people trying to comfort one another. She grabbed the intercom and delivered instructions as calmly as she could. Everyone, remain seated and keep your belts fastened. We have someone assisting with the controls. Please trust us. Asterisk. The stranger glanced at her, just briefly, but in that glance she saw something profound, a silent exchange of trust and determination. They were two people thrown together by fate, relying on each other without hesitation. Asterisk. A sudden alarm blared. Engine 2 dropped into the red zone. Asterisk. He muttered, Come on, hold it together. His fingers danced across the switches, rerouting power, adjusting fuel flow, performing tasks that even trained pilots hesitated to attempt manually. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Still, he remained focused, unshakable. Asterisk. The plane bucked violently, dropping 100 feet in seconds. Alica slammed a hand against the wall to avoid falling. What's happening? She gasped out. Asterisk. Engine 2's failing faster than I thought. We need to divert. He pointed to the navigation screen, which flickered with static. Find me the nearest runway. Any runway. Asterisk. Alica scanned the emergency maps, her voice trembling as she read coordinates aloud. He nodded, initiating manual override, guiding the aircraft toward the nearest airport like a man wrestling with a wild animal. Asterisk. Behind her. The captain groaned faintly, but remained too weak to assist. Asterisk. The stranger leaned forward, eyes burning. With focus. "We're going to make it," he said, not as reassurance, but as a promise. Alica believed him. For the first time since the chaos began, hope surged in her chest. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his past, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was their only chance to survive. The thunder of the failing engines echoed through the cockpit like a warning drum, steady and relentless. Alica Romen stood beside the stranger who had taken command of Flight 782, watching as he wrestled with controls meant for trained pilots. Sweat glistened on his forehead, yet not once did his hands tremble. Every motion was deliberate, precise, born of instinct or experience she still couldn't explain. Below them, the ground was still an invisible blur beneath thick cloud cover. The aircraft trembled, its metal frame creaking under the strain. Every few seconds, the plane dipped, then jerked upward as the stranger fought to keep it level. Alica's heart pounded with every sudden drop. The passengers behind them were crying, praying, clinging to each other as fear rippled through the cabin like a wave. Runway located, Alica said, tapping the navigation screen. 8 miles south. They've cleared it for emergency landing. The stranger nodded once, never taking his eyes off the horizon. Good. If the second engine holds for even 5 more minutes, we'll make it. And if it doesn't? Alica whispered. He exhaled slowly. Then we don't. The simple honesty in his words chilled her more than the situation itself. Yet he said it calmly, not to frighten her, but because there was no time for false hope. As they descended, the clouds finally thinned, revealing a landscape streaked with roads, fields, and distant buildings. The runway stretched ahead like a thin strip of salvation. Emergency vehicles lined its edges, fire engines, ambulances, and airport rescue crews, all waiting for Flight 782. Their flashing lights danced faintly through the haze. The stranger adjusted the yoke, guiding the aircraft with a tense but controlled descent. "Tell the cabin to brace," he said. Alica grabbed the intercom. "Everyone, adopt the brace position immediately. Head down, hands over your necks. Stay in your seats." Her voice cracked only once, but she forced herself to sound strong. This might be the last instruction they ever heard. Behind her, 300 lives hinged on whether they listened. She returned to the stranger's side. His jaw tightened as the altitude meter ticked downward. The wind outside whipped violently, rattling. The plane. "Landing gear deploying," he announced. A metallic groan reverberated through the plane as the wheels extended. For a terrifying moment, one gear hesitated, stuttering halfway. Alica's breath caught. "Come on," he urged. Finally. All 3 wheels locked in place with a heavy clang. The runway drew closer. 5,000 feet, 3,000, 1,000. "Hold on," he murmured. The first engine sputtered. The second coughed, weakened but still alive. Alica clung to the cockpit wall, bracing herself. The ground rushed toward them at impossible speed. Then, impact. The wheels slammed against the runway with bone-rattling force. Screams echoed down the cabin. The plane bounced once-twice before the stranger fought it down, forcing the nose steady. The brakes screeched. Smoke billowed from the tires. The aircraft skidded nearly the entire length of the runway, trembling. Like a wounded giant. Finally, after what felt like centuries, the plane slowed, came to a crawl, stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the faint rumble of the engines winding down. Alica gasped as adrenaline burst from her lungs in a sob. Passengers began crying, some hysterically, others in sheer relief. People embraced strangers. Parents held their children. The elderly man with the leather journal clutched it to his chest as tears streamed down his cheeks. Asterisk. They were alive, all 300 of them. She turned to thank the man who had made it possible. Asterisk, but he was already unbuckling his seat, moving with quiet urgency. He didn't bask in the moment, didn't wait for applause. He gently checked the captain, then the unconscious co-pilot, ensuring they were stable enough for medical crews. Asterisk. You did it, Alica whispered. Her voice shook. You saved everyone on this plane. Asterisk. He paused just long enough to look at her, a steady, unreadable look that carried gratitude, regret, and something she couldn't name. You helped, he replied. You kept them calm. You made it possible. Asterisk. Before she could say anything else, he stepped past her and exited the cockpit. Asterisk. Alica followed him into the aisle, but the chaos of rescue teams boarding, passengers crying, and medical crew rushing toward the pilots made her pause. People were cheering, hugging her, thanking her. By the time she pushed through the crowd and ran down the steps of the aircraft into the bright sunlight, he was gone. Asterisk. She looked around wildly across the runway, the rescue vehicles, the terminal windows, but there was no sign of him. No name, no explanation, no farewell. Asterisk. Just a ghost who had appeared in their darkest moment and vanished before anyone could ask who he was. Asterisk. Days later, investigators inspected the plane and confirmed a rare mechanical malfunction combined with a slow, undetected gas leak. They released a public statement praising the unknown civilian who took control of Flight 782, but no one stepped forward. Asterisk. Alica often found herself staring out of airport windows, wondering where he was now, who he was. Asterisk. But one thing she knew with absolute certainty. Asterisk. A stranger had saved 300 lives and chose to remain nothing more than a mystery.